A lot of the work I'm going to talk about is actually in collaboration with John, Brian, a few people here at Virginia Tech. So we are funded by this program from IARPA called OSI, Open Source Indicators, and it's one of these big data mining programs. IARPA announcement today, by the way, again. So I got all a flurry of emails from my program manager. It's a program that basically aims to mine public data 24/7. So it's not data mining that's conducted after the data is collected. It has to be running continuously 24/7 and generate alerts about events that are going to happen across the globe. So the events that are of interest, one of them is obviously a disease outbreak, but they're also interested in social events like a protest that's going to happen, some sort of financial market crash and so on. And they are evaluating us by comparing our predictions against a newspaper to see whether these things actually happen. Right? So if you forecast that a disease outbreak is going to happen tomorrow in this province or this country, it better be there in the newspaper sometime in the future. Right? So I'll talk a little bit about it. So we are forecasting these 4 categories of events: civil unrest, and the type of forecast we have to give is extremely specific. We have to forecast who is going to protest, where are they going to protest, why are they going to protest, and when. So you have to say lawyers are protesting for wages in this city on Thursday, right? And so it has to be as specific as that. And then you have to forecast disease outbreaks. They are interested in both common diseases like the flu as well as rare diseases. And again, you have to say when the outbreak is going to happen and where and so on. And then there's financial instability and elections and so on. And this has to be done in 21 countries of Latin America, not the US. IARPA is not authorized to do any surveillance of US citizens. So we are taking the least controversial part of the world so far, and that's Latin America, 21 countries of Latin America. So we have a system that's in production that's been doing it. So for the audience today, I'm going to focus more on the flu, influenza-like illnesses, and then we're going to talk about rare diseases, how we forecast them. But before we get into that, you want to talk about how we are evaluated. There's a separate team from MITRE. Incidentally, we have a person from MITRE today, Chrissy, who's not here now. Okay. So MITRE, she was actually part of this team at MITRE. She also happens to be a Virginia Tech doctoral student, but nobody knows that. So MITRE constructs what is called this GSR, a gold standard report. And they have analysts whose job it is to simply go through newspapers and code all the events happening in these newspapers in the form of a standard vocabulary. And that forms this gold standard report. So the gold standard report is, once it's recorded, that becomes fixed. At the end of every month, we get a progress report. The progress report will say how well did we do on our predictions, what was the lead time, how ahead of time did we predict it, how accurate were we, the quality, and what is our precision and recall. Precision is simply how often when you said you're going to have an event did it actually happen. Recall is how many of the actual events did you forecast. And then probability, which is the actual confidence in your predictions. And we have yearly and semi-yearly targets to meet for each of these metrics. So, like I mentioned, this is a huge big data project. Any form of data that you think is relevant, could be potentially relevant, we are eager to merge it and put it into our system. We have thousands, tens of thousands of blogs and news feeds, Twitter, Bloomberg, market data, a lot of data that comes from Google, Wikipedia. There's also a lot of data specific to Latin America because those are the countries we're interested in. Opinion polls, health map. John talked about health map. So health map itself is a huge data source for us. Both the news articles in health map and the actual alerts that come out of health map. Weather, obviously that's very relevant for this. So anyway, so the list goes on. The system right now, like I said, is running 24/7. It runs on the Amazon cloud. For those of you who don't know, the cloud is not up there, but over here in Western. It's a big server farm will probably consuming as much electricity as a little town. Probably the cooling itself probably consumes as much energy as a little town. Forget actual computers. We deliver about 45 to 50 warnings a day. So that is how many events are happening in that whole continent. Some outbreak, some protest, some financial event that's happening. The amount of data that we have integrated is about 10 terabytes. It keeps on growing because new data keeps coming in. This project is supposed to run for 3 years. We are in year 1.5 now, so the amount will at least double. So let me talk about how we forecast the flu. This is our funnel picture. I don't know if you can see it very detailed, but the most important part is the top row. It describes the data sources that we are using to forecast the flu. The first is health map that I pointed out. The next is a little Tweety bird. And then we have the weather data, and then we have the Google search trends, the Google flu trends. So we talked about Google flu trends not being good, but we basically think of flu trends as input data for us. And we can think of our system as a corrector to the Google flu trends data. And then I want to talk about a couple of interesting data sources on the right. One of them is restaurant reservations. Okay, so there are a lot of online sites where people can go and reserve tables at restaurants. And if you see a spike in cancellations, that tells you potentially something could be going on. Okay, so that's one data that we ingest. Again, this work comes from collaboration with John's group. And the last one is even more interesting. It's imagery from parking lots outside hospitals. So imagine taking an aerial view. Word is correct. Hysterical. Remember, this is IR, so we are intelligence analysts. Huh?
You gotta be serious, it's IR.
I'm sorry? Yeah. No, it is serious. So we work with a company in Boston called RS Metrics, and what they've done for us is they have satellites that are tasked to get aerial imagery from a lot of locations. So we have chosen locations that correspond to places where these hospitals are located, and you get aerial image of the parking lots outside these hospitals, and then we have image analysis algorithms that can count how many cars are in that lot. So the whole thing is, there's no human involved in that loop. And so that gives you another time series that you can then try to correlate with what's going on. I mean, you have to account for seasonality and a lot of other things. This is not as outlandish as it sounds. There are a lot of people who use this technology. For example, all the retail companies, JCPenney and so on, or the companies that run these big malls, they use the software to figure out, is the consumer demand going to be what it was last Christmas? Is it going to be higher? Is it going to be lower? And they make projections based on this. So, like I mentioned, health map is one of the data sources that we use. All the data coming out of health map is itself translated into a vector format that is then used to in a lot of regression approaches to make these forecasts. This is open table. This slide should actually say restaurant reservations, not hotel reservations. Although that could be interesting to travel, right? People cancel, make travel plans. So open table is a website that's public. By the way, all the data that we are looking at is public. There's no secret data or snooping or anything going on. All the data is available for anybody with a reasonable amount of money. It should be very high, but it's public. So we get this open table data, and we have observed a lot of correlations. If you pick suitable reservation times, like lunch slot and dinner slot, so if you collect data during the specific times of the day for cities that have a large number of restaurants, where the number of entries is significant enough, you can find a lot of correlations to moving food trends. And PAHO, which is the Pan American Health Organization, the equivalent of WHO for that region, that records all these statistics. This is the parking lot data that I mentioned. You could basically take an image like this and automatically estimate the fill rate of the parking lot. and compare the fill rate with historical rates, accounting for weekends and festivals, whatnot. And there are a lot of reasons it won't work. Like for example, if you try to do this imagery on Blacksburg, you have to account for game days because people park everywhere. There's a slot, even in hospitals, I'm sure. So we've applied this on 3 countries: Argentina, Chile, and Mexico. And the number of hospitals that we've analyzed is actually very few. It's in the order of 10s or 20s. Because you want to choose a hospital that is reasonably in an urban location, also has a reasonable number of spots for you to be confident of this type of analysis. So we order these images from satellites, and it's not always the case that these images can be used. A lot of times there is cloud cover, there are shadows, or there's a construction going on in that site. So, various reasons things don't work out. So we end up creating these stencils defining both the parking lot, the perimeter, and also street parking. Sometimes you need to account for that. This is sort of what the performance of the system looks like. The blue curve is what we're supposed to predict. The red curve is what we're predicting. So it's not, it's okay in a magnitude wise, but you're missing the peak of the flu. But it's remarkable that this data set can give you this level of information. So I want to show you, these are the official performance numbers that we get from IARPA. I told you IARPA gives us a scorecard. This is our scorecard. In the recent past, tested on some back data. The baseline is actually Google Flu Trends, and the pipeline that we developed, the ILM pipeline, is the last column. So we're doing better than Flu Trend, but we're still not as good as we can be. So the scores are out of 4. They're graded like a GPA. So we are not even at a B level. One other nice thing that our system can do is, in addition to making these forecasts, it can actually predict the full shape of that curve, the epi curve. Right? So this is important if you're an actual public health official. You would actually like to know is the curve peak or peak still to come, and so on. So figuring out when the season began, what is the date of the peak, value of the peak, these are all important issues that we submit along with the recommendations, along with the predictions. The final system looks like this. This is our what we call the audit trail dashboard. All these analysts who receive a prediction want to know what is the rationale behind the prediction, so that they feel more confident about trusting them or taking action upon them. So this is just a screen full of data. So all I meant to say here is there's a lot of data being crunched, and often people would like to know exactly what data went into their particular prediction. I want to quickly conclude by talking about other types of diseases. An example is hantavirus. And again, we are forecasting when it's going to happen and where it's going to happen. And we do even better in this sector. So what we do with hantavirus is we basically take all the data coming out of John's system from Health Lab, and we are modeling all those news articles as a time series. And we're trying to forecast, is there going to be an anomalous coverage or some sort of precursors related to hantavirus in this time series. The actual method we use is based on tensor decompositions, where we are trying to look at all the news articles. This is very similar to the topic modeling work that we talked about, except the underlying probabilistic model is different. And once we have these underlying tensors, then you ask the question, is there anything anomalous about it relative to the past, and use that to make a forecast. This is our performance here. This slide is a mouthful. But if you look at the quality column, the quality is much better than the ILI quality. There are a couple of instances where we cross 3. The lead time we get is about a week's time, which means from the day we predict it to the day it appears in a newspaper is almost a week. So that's the amount of lead time that I have against. The recall and precision are not exactly one universally. So when the recall is low, it means there are events we did not predict. When the precision is low, it means we predicted some events which turned out to be false alarms. So tweaking that is another important research issue. And again, this is the dashboard for rare diseases. You see the little rat over there to denote hantavirus. Anyway. So this is a collaboration, like I mentioned, between a lot of people. With Virginia Brian, who's over here, is actually in this building. The University of Maryland, College Park, and then John's group at Harvard. Happy to answer.